Repair Clinic encourages you to perform this procedure safely. In this video, we will show one or more of these icons to alert you when to use caution. Most hedge trimmer repairs will require some disassembly of the product. Before you attempt this, make sure the engine has cooled. Next, you should remove the wire and boot from the spark plug to prevent the engine from accidentally starting. We recommend wearing protective gloves when handling the trimmer blades. We also recommend emptying the fuel tank. To access the gear case components and remove the blades, set the trimmer on its side with the muffler facing down. Use two 10mm sockets to remove the locking nuts securing the blades. Remove the blade guard and washers, along with the tip guard. Now set the trimmer upside down and use a T27 Torx bit to unthread the screws, securing the gear case cover. With the screws unthreaded, lift off the cover. Remove all of the blade mounting bolts and washers. You can use pliers to lift out the felt seal. Remove the outer spur gear and carefully lift off the lower blade. Lift off the spacer plate, and you can remove the upper blade. Replace or reinstall the blades by first positioning the inner spur gear so the holes are in line with the blade support. Now align the upper blade with the sharp edge facing away from the blade support. Replace the spacer plate and align the lower blade with the sharp edge facing the upper blade. Replace the outer spur gear with the cam aligned on the opposite side of the inner gear cam, making sure the holes in the gear are in line with the blades. Adjust the lower blade until the gear sets into place. Replace the felt seal. Confirm that the gasket is in place on the gear case cover, then realign the cover and secure it with the screws. With the washers intact on the mounting bolts, thread the bolts through the blades and into the support. The longer bolt goes through the handle. Set the trimmer on its side. Now realign the blade guard on the mounting bolts. Then position the washers. The manufacturer recommends using new mounting nuts to secure the blades. Thread the nuts and tighten the mounting bolts. Now loosen the bolts a half turn to ensure proper blade tension. Tighten the nuts to lock the bolts in place. Replace the tip guard and secure it in the same way. To ensure the Hedge trimmer operates smoothly, we recommend injecting some lithium grease into the gear case. When doing repairs not related to the blades, we recommend keeping the blade cover on to reduce the chance of injury. To remove the clutch assembly, set the trimmer upside down and use the T27 Torx bit to unthread the screws, securing the gear case to the engine block. Use a 3/4 inch socket or a spark plug wrench to loosen the spark plug. Then unthread it. Confirm that the piston is in the down position. Then insert a cord into the cylinder to prevent the piston from moving. You can use a 1/2 inch socket drive to help unthread the clutch assembly. Replace or reinstall the assembly by threading it onto the crankshaft, then tighten. Remove the cord from the cylinder and rethread the spark plug. Be careful not to strip the threads by over-tightening. Realign the gear case on the engine block and secure it with the screws. Be sure to secure the grounding wire under the appropriate screw. If you need to replace the flywheel, use the T27 Torx bit to unthread the screws to release the upper half of the engine housing. Make sure the flywheel magnets are rotated out of the way. Then unthread the mounting screws securing the ignition coil. Set the coil aside. Now use a strap wrench to secure the flywheel and a 1/2 inch socket to loosen the flywheel starter pawl. Unthread the pawl and slide off the lock washer. You can now remove the old flywheel. Install the new flywheel by aligning it on the crankshaft. Replace the lock washer, then thread on the starter pawl and tighten. Now realign the ignition coil on the engine and thread the mounting screws loosely. Place a business card between the coil and the flywheel. Rotate the flywheel so the magnets align with the coil, then tighten the screws. This will align the coil the correct distance from the flywheel. Reposition the upper half of the engine housing, then replace the screws to secure. The screws with the larger threads go in the bottom. To uninstall the carburetor, first note the orientation of the primer return and intake hoses, then disconnect them from the carburetor. Unthread the knob to detach the air filter housing. Use the T27 Torx bit to unthread the carburetor mounting bolts. Set the air filter base aside. Use a 10mm wrench to loosen the locking nut to detach the throttle cable. You can use a small flathead screwdriver to help remove the cable retaining spring. Now fully detach the cable and remove the carburetor. Before you replace or reinstall the carburetor, make sure the retaining spring is still on the throttle cable. Now align the end of the cable in the swivel on the carburetor. Position the retaining spring on the swivel to secure the cable. Align the cable on the bracket and tighten the locking nut. Confirm that the mounting bolts have been inserted through the air filter base and the intake gasket is in place on the isolator. Now align the carburetor on the bolts. Then thread the bolts into the isolator and tighten. Reposition the air filter housing and thread the knob to secure. Connect the intake and primer return hoses to the appropriate ports on the carburetor. To access the rear handle components, use a 14mm wrench to unthread the nut securing the on-off switch. Now use a flathead screwdriver to depress the retaining tab to release the handle cover. Fully remove the cover. If you need to replace the throttle control lever, first detach the lock lever. Then remove the old control lever and spring. Install the new throttle control lever by first inserting the end of the throttle cable into the lever and securing it in the slot. You can provide more slack for the cable by loosening the throttle cable locking nut on the carburetor and pushing the cable up. Position the spring on the new control lever. Then align the spring as you snap the lever into place. If applicable, reposition the opposite end of the throttle cable in the carburetor bracket and tighten the locking nut. Continue the reassembly by snapping the lock lever into place. Align the eyelet terminal over the on-off switch. Position the handle cover. Then insert the switch through the hole in the cover and snap the cover into place. Thread the nut to secure the switch. With the reassembly complete, reattach the wire and boot to the spark plug, refill the fuel tank, and your hedge trimmer should be ready for use.